Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. My guest today is Keith Cadieux, who visited my creative writing university class. And I did a recording of the class where he responded. We did kind of discussion, me and Keith, in response to a variety of questions that students had written down for me to ask Keith and to just discuss myself. In the final class of my creative writing courses, I just answer student questions. So you won't really hear the students necessarily in this recording, just because of the way the room was set up. We didn't really have the opportunity to record the students. Also, you might hear a couple of them talk a little bit, but for the most part, I've repeated questions or just cut them out, either because they requested to have their voices cut out or simply because they just weren't audible on the recording. But Keith Cadieux, who is an author of horror and weird fiction, and also quote unquote literary fiction. Keith Cadieux has an excellent book called Gaze, a novella out that we discussed briefly in the interview. I'll link to that novella. If it's still available, I would encourage you to get it. It might be very hard to find. His newer book is an anthology he co-edited with Dustin Gearhart, and it's called The Shadow Over Portage in Maine. If you're a fan of my work, you'll want to get that anthology as well, because I'm in it. I write the introduction, but also I wrote a short story under the pseudonym Richard Crow. So I would recommend the other people in the anthology as well. Really some excellent, very strong, very diverse work. Again, it's called The Shadow Over Portage in Maine. Links to that and to Keith's other material will be included in the show notes, which is available at jonathanball.com/2. jonathanball.com/2. So without further ado, here's an interview with Keith Cadieux. One thing just to quickly note about this interview is that it's in two parts. It's a very long interview, so I split it up over two parts. So here's part one of the interview with Keith Cadieux. Again, answering a lot of different questions, him and I both, in response to student inquiries. So enjoy. So I guess at this point, I'll just say, welcome to Keith Cadieux. We were talking about how French he wants to be, which I guess, Cadieux, I believe, is the Frenchest you can get. I think it's funny that parents don't say it that way, though. What do you typically say if you introduce yourself?
My parents cannot speak a word of French, nor can my grandparents. Hence, it's Cadieux or Cadeau.
Cadeau.
Which has led to many misspellings. And my one of my work IDs says the word cadeau, like present, in French, like the translation for gift or present is cadeau.
Oh, okay, sure.
So that's how my name tag appears at one of my jobs. Yes, so Keith Gift. But Cadieux would be the Frenchy way. But
so, and you are an author, of course. I mean, you've published a novella. Mm-hmm. It's a novel / novella. It's his own book called Gaze, which is I like to call it a horror story. I guess it's kind of arguably not a horror story, but I think it kind of fits in the realm of horror. And you've also got this anthology that you edited, which you have a story in as well, which is what we've been looking at today, The Shadow Over Portage in Maine, Weird Fictions, which is edited by you and Dustin Gearhart, which I'm probably also saying wrong.
That's how I've been saying it too, and he hasn't corrected me. So.
And one thing that people just wanted to ask about in the kind of prepared questions is, what writing community do you feel you belong to, genre or style-wise? Because, here's this anthology that says Weird Fictions. You've got this novella that on one level you could argue is kind of literary realism, more or less, but has this, I'm trying to remember if it actually tips in supernatural at any point. If I recall, it's not clear, but I'd have to double check it.
It's pretty ambiguous. That's fairly by design. I would like to be a horror writer. Like, that is definitely the vein that I most ascribe to. And I think weird fiction is an offshoot of horror, or a very specific kind of horror. There is, like, weird fiction that isn't horrifying is much more rare than weird that hits any other note or vein. So it does seem to be primarily an offshoot of horror writing. So yeah, I would go with horror writer, despite the negative connotations that come with that, which are sort of slowly being knocked down. But if people ask what I write and I say horror, I get the look.
Sure.
So, and that's fine. That tells me that you don't want to read what I write anyway. That's cool. And yeah, weird fiction has become a more mainstream term in the last little while, and it's weird fiction is great because it can cross more genres. So you have like Jeff Vandermeer, who is definitely doing more sci-fi weird, but a lot of it does have that horror connotation. So like the Southern Reach has a lot of horror in it, though it's maybe more arguably a sci-fi story, but it has like this cross-genre aspect of it.
Can you maybe talk about what you think? One of the questions is what are the actual elements of weird fiction in your view, which is a little bit contentious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, you mentioned Jeff Vandermeer. I've got a book here. It was edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer, and it contains all sorts of authors. Quote unquote, it's called The New Weird, and it has authors from Clive Barker to classic kind of authors in that vein, like or more traditional kind of. He's not really a traditional author, but he's like an older now, more established author. People like Thomas Ligotti, who are very well known in that community, but not necessarily well known outside of it. And then people like Jay Lake, who sometimes is more sort of associated with science fiction, and so on and so forth. Vandermeer, as you say, is kind of, arguably a writer of weird fiction, but kind of has this almost Kafkaesque association sometimes, as Ligotti sometimes does, and so on. But what do you see as like the elements of weird fiction? Because it is a term that as is old, like it gets used to refer to Lovecraft and people even before Lovecraft, all the way back to like the late 1800s. We can talk about there being weird fiction. Yeah, I think you're right to point out like there's maybe more of a interest or explosion of it of late, and I'm curious to know what you think about weird fiction generally. Like maybe why is it of interest to you, and just what do you think it is? Because again, like the question here is like, what are the elements of weird fiction in your view? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing even though I ascribe it to horror because I get, and that might just be personal taste. Like a lot of the weird stories that I like the most, they are scary. But what I think defines weird in terms of like its own mode, or like that separates it out, is that there's something wrong that you can't quite figure out what it is. Something's off. So like the Southern Reach trilogy, which goes into all these like what the hell is Area X? That's the whole thrust of the entire thing, and it is more science fiction-y, but it's got that sense. So Thomas Ligotti also has just like these strains of like just absolutely bananas. Like there is some like the worlds that he creates are so categorically wrong. There's so many things that are off about those worlds or those characters, the rules of how things operate. Like the term weird, and that like the contention of like where it comes from, and like Lovecraft is definitely in there. There are definitely some stories that are more weird to that sense that I've just said, where like there's something indefinably wrong or off, and there are some where it's a big friggin' alien monster. But the term itself seems to have come from Robert Aikman, who like his stories are often described as the proto-weird, but he didn't call his stories weird. He said they were strange. Sure. So they are already, there's this fight over what the word actually is. But what I think defines his stories and that people latched onto is that the thing that is off is never really fully explained or explored. It's just sort of left to be unsettling. And then Shirley Jackson does that as well. So that would be in terms of where would I most like to be lumped in terms of like what genre am I? It would be Shirley Jackson-esque kind of horror.
Stop hitting that table.
Sorry.
It's interesting you bring that up because I was just reading a book earlier today called by S.T. Joshi, which is an academic book called The Modern Weird Tale. And he starts with Shirley Jackson, and it goes on great length about Shirley Jackson. Then he talks about Ramsey Campbell a great deal. Mm-hmm. Then he has this later chapter where he kind of discusses people who are more interested in him in terms of modern weird fiction. And he gets into Ligotti at that point, and Aiken and so on. But Ligotti is, to me, just one of the most fascinating people on earth. And the way I like to think of weird fiction now, especially, but I think it's something to do maybe with it as a genre, is kind of how Ligotti, to me, is the most extreme version of weird fiction in that the way that Joshi explains it, instead of having this sort of universe where you have like this real world and then there's like some supernatural intrusion into the real world. Mm-hmm. So the idea that there's a supernatural realm and a real world that are, again, sort of side by side, but one's intruding and taking over the other in a certain point in the story. The way Joshi looks at Ligotti's fiction, and Ligotti kind of talks about his own stories, is that you just don't have a real world. You just have this strange world. And especially in Ligotti, like there's no realism at all in those stories. There's really like barely characters. They barely have psychologies. The world is fuzzy. Like sometimes it's just a bunch of clouds, like outside of a window, and you really have no sense that it exists in many ways. Yeah. But it's just a strangeness, and Ligotti kind of talks about in his nonfiction or interviews, or even in his fiction. A lot of his fiction is just essays, in the middle of like a story. Yeah. And he'll just like talk about like how the world is a nightmare. An unreal thing that we sometimes like pretend is real, but actually is a crazed, nihilistic death house. To me, like that's the most extreme sort of that I've ever seen for weird fiction. And then even somebody like Lovecraft, when you go back, is kind of suggesting that advancement towards that idea. You thought the world was one way, but really Cthulhu is the dark horror, and he's very material and he's very there in certain respects. Sure.
But setting up that the universe is more against you than we previously led to believe. Like that's a big Lovecraft thing. Is if you're going to believe in a god, why do you think it likes you? And that, just so to go back to like Ligotti's settings, and they're so weird. I think there's an interesting contrast there, like you said, where normal horror will have the regular world and something supernatural invades it or impinges itself upon it. And the weird might just be the opposite, where the world itself is what's wrong, and somebody normal is plunked into it. And in the case of Ligotti, the normal is only the reader. Like he doesn't even bother to give you a character who's trying to suss out what the hell's happening. But the weird tends to be a normal person trying to make sense of things that don't make sense in a conventional way. They just do not go together. And that leaves you with this sort of unsettled feeling. That is what I think puts it into the horror vein, because like the very unsettlingness of it means that you're sort of kind of like that they're very rarely going to be funny or action packed, but they can be. But they're usually like the taste in your mouth after is a scary sort of thing afterwards.
So I just want to bring up a couple of the prepared questions about genre, and then we'll maybe just see what people want to talk about before we kind of maybe look back at these prepared. But there's a couple of questions about genre more generally. Like, what genre do you think is overplayed and in need of an original take is one? Is there a genre you think is just kind of overplayed and kind of burning itself out and needs to be revitalized in some way? I
guess it depends on the media as well. Like, so books are a little bit tougher. There are things within a certain genre that are definitely like vampires and zombies enough. Superheroes. I'm tired of superheroes. I love superheroes, but there's too damn many. and they tend to repeat themselves, and then they self-reference that they're repeating themselves. But in terms of just like a big overt genre, like it's hard to say. There's definitely ones that I don't like as much.
Yeah.
But in terms of are they getting overplayed, like I think it's more facets within a genre that get overdone than a genre itself.
I almost feel that literary realism is peaked in the 1900s in many ways.
Sure.
Like, I don't think it's dead, but I kind of wish it was dead.
Yeah. It perhaps gets too much clout.
Maybe that's all it is.
And it's not allowing for a whole lot of experimentation. But every now and then there is something that falls into literary realism that did try to do something different. But
another kind of question, I don't quite understand this question, to be honest. So maybe someone wants to clarify. But how do you break away from a genre that you feel is hindering your writing? Have you ever felt that you're doing the same? Maybe just the question in some ways is like, do you feel like you're doing the same thing too much, or like in the same genre too much? Have you ever felt that?
I haven't. That might be more like I don't really have enough work to have. Oh, I hope I don't have enough work that readers are fatigued with what. But I see that being more of a problem of people getting tired of what you're putting out. But I'm not tired of horror. Like that's not what's doing it for me. I'm wondering if the question is maybe more directed to the connotations of being associated with that genre, possibly being a burden, which I think they can be. And like horror is one of the, like I said, like when I tell people that I write horror, you get a look. So then the easiest way around it was to invent different names for the genre. So like for a long time, like right after the 90s, so we had the 70s and 80s horror boom, and then the mid 80s collapse of crap, and then everyone who was still working in horror fought desperately to call it something else. It was gothic.
In the 90s, you could not publish a horror novel.
You could not. No,
Save your life.
There was no way. So they started calling it something else. And like one that bothers me the most is gothic. They'll just slap this new word on it. And
dark fantasy.
Dark fantasy, urban fantasy. Like, I can see that as being a thing where by association you are sometimes hampered by the genre, that's something that is like horror is having a resurgence, but something that is very much still poo-pooed and downplayed would be romance.
Sure.
Which it's just as like it's just as dismissive to say that genre can't do something good as to say that horror can't. But we're just in a moment where horror's getting a little bit of clout because people are terrified all the friggin' time.
I think people also just, like, you've had a bunch of movies come out that, you've had this weird, I think of Get Out and like, there's been a weird moment of movies that people are like pretending, suddenly horror is of interest in the mainstream. Like, there's intelligent horror. Like I saw some article a little while ago. It's like, is it time for intelligent horror? I'm like, horror is like, and science fiction are like the two most intelligent genres in many respects. Historically, the genres that specifically are using philosophical issues as plot devices, and so on and so forth. And it just that kind of article is just written by somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah. But I think there's a weird moment of like, you have like people crossing into horror for whatever reason. I think it's actually artistic reasons, because in film at least, it's a genre that has the possibility of making a film with no stars, which is makes a lot of things possible from a budget perspective. But also like it's an extreme genre where the audience is expecting, it doesn't need, but it can handle extreme material, and so there's really not a lot of censorship concerns, or even just material like anything you really want to do, you could do in a manner speaking. So it's very it has a lot of possibility for radical experimentation. Plus, you can keep the budget down. And again, I think in a weird way, it's a genre that takes a lot of risks, or can take a lot of risks, even if it doesn't. Yeah.
Well, then like Get Out's a great example of dealing with a social issue that no one seems to really have the guts to deal with in a realist mode.
Well,
like the message of Get Out would not be well received if it had not been couched in this the horror vein, like the little bit of non-realism that's in there, right? For anyone who hasn't seen Get Out, we'll ruin the surprise. But making it like hypnotism, does do this little bit where you get to disembody it a little bit, so you can absorb the message a little bit. It's more palatable than just look how racist we are, which is essentially the story.
Well, movies also have the issue of like somebody wants to make a kind of risky topic.
Yeah,
and then they're asking for $300 million to do it. You can kind of understand why somebody wouldn't want to give them that money.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
if it's only $3 million, or and it's a little different.
You have a lower budget.
I forget their budget, but it was probably $3 million.
The ability to deal with stuff that's more extreme, whether it's social commentary or just so like another movie that's fairly recently would be Hereditary.
I haven't seen that one yet, but yeah, people talk about that.
Great. There is something in there that if it were not a horror movie, you'd never be able to even approach doing it. But that's an interesting example too, because that movie first appeared like in one of the film festival circuits. Like there was no press about it. It wasn't a large release, and it wasn't going to get large release until it hit this festival. And it sort of sounds like they screened it and nobody knew what it was. So like no one went in thinking, well, here's this horror movie. That was just, well, here's this movie with Toni Collette and Gabriel Byrne and they're good. So let's go see what it is. And it scared the crap out of them. Because it is this great movie where like the less you know about it going in, like the slow build of it is just fantastic. And so I think that's an interesting counterpoint to knowing the genre beforehand. Because like that's something too, that when you signal to your audience that there's going to be extreme stuff here, and that's what horror does. That you give people a heads up of the kind of material they might be dealing with, and because if they're not ready for it, you never know how that will be received. And Hereditary, I think, shocked people because it didn't have that contract when it first appeared. That no one really understood what they were watching, and then it was pretty nuts. Like by it's a very slow burn, and then the last 20 minutes are crazy. It's very good. You have to go see that movie.
Well, let's maybe jump out of horror for a little bit. Did that kind of address the genre question? Like, I don't know, like, to me, like, the issue of approaching a genre, like, feeling stuck in it, I think if anytime I've ever felt stuck in a sense of maybe I should stop writing this kind of thing, usually the answer has been to go deeper into it. I'm repeating tropes as opposed to like the genre being a problem. But it just maybe it's played out. Like I played out what I'm doing in that, and I just need to go like further into it. Like I was thinking of creating poetry for a little while, and I thought, well, before I start moving more fully into fiction, I'll write a whole book of poetry about how I think poetry's dead to me. And just go deeper into it, and like what are all the things that I think are problems with what I'm doing. And I like made a set of rules, like I won't do a poem like this because I've done a bunch. I won't do that. Like I was just, my friend Ryan Fitzpatrick will do this. Every time he has a new like big project, he'll make a list of all the things he did in his last project that he's not allowed to do anymore. And that just kind of keeps things fresh for him, even though he's still kind of doing the same thing. He kind of just has to try different tactics and approaches because he just kind of disbars himself almost arbitrarily from doing like the same sort of thing over and over again. So in that state where you're not like abandoning a genre so much as you're going like, deeper into it, I think, which usually like the way out is through, like it is in Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
Like you got to go through like and like further into like hell to get somewhere interesting.
Yeah. Although there's also like examining, like if it's a genre that you like and you're worried that your audience is not going to for whatever reason because of poor connotations or anything like that. Something that is maybe helpful is to figure out what it is about the genre that you like. And if can that be emphasized, and then there must be things about the genre that you don't, and then maybe that is why it has the poor connotation. And maybe you want to address that, because you can also use the genre to poke at all the problems with the genre. So Cormac McCarthy would be someone who does that with Westerns. And, so like Westerns had a similar like burnout where there was just like Louis L'Amour and Jack London, and like it was everywhere. And ripoffs of those were all over the place, all these cowboy stories. And they're all just fluffy garbage. There's nothing to them. They're the hero's journey, the John Wayne or Shane type stuff. And Cormac McCarthy was like, well, no, like none of you are paying attention to any of the history of the West or what the connotation of any of these stories are with outlaws and in cities that or towns that don't have law enforcement. Like, you're not dealing with what actually happens to those people. And he did, like, very brutally just bring that to the forefront, and in a way that I think people maybe weren't ready for. So like the start of the Border trilogy, the first book is called All the Pretty Horses. That book is not about pretty horses, nor are the rest of them. Or like Blood Meridian, which
I had to read twice. The first time I had to quit reading it, it was the most violent book I'd ever read in my whole life. And I get I'm a guy who reads horror novels. I never read something so violent.
Yeah.
And it was truly hard to read, which I think is great.
Yeah.
Like I feel like my complaint about the horror genre is that you have this intellectualized, cold, detached narrator a lot of the times in horror genre, which can work, but I feel like there's this way in which, if you're speaking of horrible things, it should be hard to speak of them. And the style should reflect that in many stories.
Sure.
But Blood Meridian was one where, like, my favorite part, not my favorite necessarily, but like the part in Blood Meridian that always I remember is like when there's a line in the book, something along the lines of, he turned the corner and then he saw the tree of dead babies.
Of course.
And it's not a metaphor.
No, it's not. There's nothing metaphorical in that book at all. The guy really is the devil.
Yeah, it's something else.
But yeah, or like using the really familiar tropes, but putting them in a setting or something else that is maybe less familiar is a good way to re-examine it. So he does that again in No Country for Old Men, where he turns into drug dealers and cops rather than cowboys and banditos. Or Breaking Bad is a Western as well. Like, and very, like, especially towards the end where, like, they have, like, actual scenes where they have their hand over their hip kind of thing, where, like, they led you into it very gradually, and then you're like, oh, he has a hat. Right? Like, it is a cowboy story, but they tricked you into thinking it wasn't. But the actual progression of it is quite familiar, but it was just plunked in a way that you didn't see it right away. That can be an interesting way to expand or play with your genre as well.
Let's just maybe dive a little more fully into like your specific story in people. This question is, what was the inspiration for Stuck? What made you decide you wanted to write this story, and was it hard to find You mean it's published in this book that you edited, but did you publish that elsewhere as well?
No, it's too long.
So for your other stories, though, like that maybe are more extreme. Is it hard to find a publisher for some of your stuff?
Oh, I think so. I have my my current story that I can't find anyone to buy is about a man with a disembodied wisp of hair that becomes a Cthulhu monster. That's my Trump story that no one wants. So it can be. And then horror is it's something too, like, where, because we're in Canada, usually you get established in Canadian lit mags and stuff first. Not very many of them want that kind of stuff. And then if you want to branch out and go to other markets that have, a little bit more cred in that particular genre, you don't have anything to show them. It's like, oh, I was in Cemetery Dance, or I was like, right? They don't like that. That can be like, I'm in a weird interstitial spot where, like, I've published a few things, but nothing super exciting that anyone like outside the CanLit scene has seen it. I made the honorable mentions list for Year's Best Horror twice.
My favorite horror story of yours is I forget the name of it, but it's a guy who is basically the conceit of it is like this underground cannibal contest. Yeah. And this guy's he's like a it's like a food eating contest, like those guys eat all the hot dogs or whatever.
Yeah.
This is like cannibalism contest, like who can eat the most cannibalized meat, and it's this fascinating, brutal, weird story.
That one is called Donner Parties.
Donner Parties, yes.
And the trick is they have to eat as much of the person as they can before they die.
Yeah, the person's still alive while this is happening.
And then they weigh them.
But like, was that a hard story to publish?
Surprisingly, no.
Really?
But that I just fell into the right market for that, opened up, and I had it sitting, and I sent it, and they liked it, because that was when I was certain there's no way, no one is buying this. There is no way.
I think I said
that
to you. Like,
I think so too, because I think I showed it to you, and you're like, "This is great. No one's going to buy that." But
well, I was wrong, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, like it can be, and then Stuck is just. The way it's laid out here is not bad, but if you were to do it in like manuscript format, it's 50 pages long. And that scares most like magazines away for sure.
How many words is that roughly? Do you remember?
It's like 15,000 word story.
So maybe talk about that, because that's a novella. That's a long length for a story. Most stories, but just to give a bit of context, most short stories are 5,000 words or under.
Yeah.
Usually, you can spot between 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 words. Now that's and you'll often will have like guidelines, from magazines and things that say, no stories below this, like stories between 1,000, 5,000, whatever. So once you're in the realm of 14,000 words, like you're in this really weird space where, one, it's too long for most people to publish as a short story, but two, it's too short to be a novel.
Yeah.
And be a standalone work. So now your options usually are, there's a few places that publish novellas, but it's very few. And they're usually more open to non-genre works.
Yeah.
There's, you could of course have your own story anthology and maybe slip it in there. Or you could, publish it in an anthology that happens to take longer work. So in your instance, you're publishing it in a book that you're also co-editing.
Yeah. I skipped the line.
So you kind of skip. This is a bit of a cheat in that.
I broke
sense.
the rules. Yes. That was the cheater way to get it out.
This is kind of related to some publishing questions that people had. So you've got a story like that. You did publish it, but from the outset, I think there must be a moment when you're writing the story where you're like, oh no. This is going to be a weird length, and should I keep going? Like, what keeps you kind of moving forward when you hit that kind of I guess the question is, there's a couple of questions along the lines of like, what kind of things you think about in terms of publishing while you're writing?
Yeah.
Or do you just try to not do that?
This one did hit, like, I was very self-aware as it was coming together that I was. From that standpoint, that I was shooting myself in the foot. That it's too long. It's such a slow burn of a story that was like selling to a magazine is going to be very, very tough. But it was, and like I played with a few ideas to try to bring the length down. And so one was like, so there's actually two pictures in the story. Like I was like, well, maybe I should just make it one. And I tried a few things that essentially broke it. Like then the story didn't work. And I like the story enough that I wanted to finish it. And
going back to the question, like, what was your actual idea originally? Like, where did you get the idea from, and like, why did it stick with you?
The original idea is from, I can't even remember how it, like some procrastinating time on the internet. I found these actual death pictures. So like what they did. When cameras first came around and the exposure time was like 2 to 3 hours, so you could sit still. That's why they all look so mad in a lot of their photographs. The thing that made the most sense to take pictures of was stuff that didn't move. So you took pictures of dead people rather than live people. And it was actually very close to like a death mask. So like before photography, if somebody died, you would make a wax impression of their face and then you would know what they looked like. So the next evolution of that was photographs of dead people. And then as that became sort of a medium of the rich to take pictures of their family, you start seeing portraits of the entire family with a dead person propped up in some weird, unnatural way, or their eyes drawn on their eyelids. And they're really, really creepy. So that, like, I had known that those existed for a while, and then the one that really threw me over the edge was another set of pictures that was of just babies being held by mothers who were covered over to look like the furniture. So they didn't want the mother in the picture, but there's no way this toddler is sitting still for the hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hour exposure time. So they would like put a blanket over the mom, put the baby on it, and it's like, and look like a chair, and it's unnerving. They look like they're being held by ghosts. So it was those images, and it just stuck in my head so much, and I was like, I have to do something with this idea of weirdly pretending the mother's not there, but being dependent on her to hold the baby. It was just such an odd sort of cultural moment for me, and it was creepy. Anything that's really creepy that sticks in my mind, it becomes a story.
So something kind of related to this. There's a couple other questions about publishing that maybe we can get into, but before that, there's so it's sort of like that. You're almost at a certain point, I think, writing it, kind of feeling this is a waste of time in terms of publishing, perhaps, or at least I'm going to get a lot of rejections on this thing, or like Donner Parties. That's another one where you're assuming rejections, even though like in both cases you publish in the stories. I think there's the idea that it's going to be a hard sell, or maybe I'm going to get rejections, and generally you're getting rejections anyway. And then also when stuff comes out, like this book comes out, you're going to get reviews, you're going to get like critical reviews, and so on. Like one of the questions that I thought was really interesting, this was. How do you take it when someone criticizes your work? And the question also kind of goes into talk about, how is it, is it normal to have this feeling that like you're writing a sort of a piece of, gold or something precious that you have to, kind of, that maybe you kind of feel personally attached to or connected to in a way where it's hard to maybe take criticism. So I guess like the question I have is like the question here is, have you ever like, is that a normal feeling to like feel like your work is somehow golden or a part of you, and to feel like upset or when people are criticizing in some way, and then two, like what do you do, like have you gotten like some heavy criticisms, or what do you do when you get like criticisms or maybe even negative reviews? Sure.
That can be tough. This book has gotten a couple of good ones and a couple of really bad reviews. And in terms of like actually feeling like there's something there that's connected to me, and then I would say that, yeah, I definitely do have that. And so like that with this story too, that was too long, that had all these logistical problems that are going to make it hard to sell. What basically kept me going was that I liked the idea so much, and then when I tried to solve these logistical problems and it made the story worse, it was just sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to have to just dig my feet in, and I'm going to do it this way because it's better this way.
Sure.
And then I've done that with stories that have been rejected. So like when I do get rejections, I do go back and reread it, and especially the amount of time it takes to get rejected. Usually you can go back and you don't remember it as well as you think you do, and quite a few times I've reread stories that have been rejected and been like, yeah, okay, there are serious problems here. And then I've gone back and fixed it. And other times I've been like, no, they're wrong. This is solid, and I've sent it right back out, and then it has gotten picked up. So there is a little bit of that la 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 mentality to it, or just it's good, so you keep putting it out. But when it's good and you still get the bad review, like that stings. That's just no fun. But usually. I haven't, so like of the stuff that's been published that has been poorly reviewed, I haven't read a review that didn't like it where I thought it was right.
That didn't like it?
Yeah.
It was right.
So I've read their criticisms and thought no, or like it's fine if you don't like it, but I haven't gotten to one where it's been so destroyed and so torn apart that I'm like, yeah, it's really bad. But yeah, there's still no fun to read.
I really don't mind it. I think I get upset when people are wrong. Like, not that they're wrong that the story's no good or something, but like they made a factual error, like they think I wrote something I didn't write or something. Or they have like a stupid assumption. Like I had a line in one of my poems which was 12 awaited another. So that's the line of the poem. So of course it's like the allusion is to, you know, the disciples awaiting the traitor. To me that's either obvious or, you know, maybe it's less obvious. But it's certainly not a reference to the muses, and I got the number of muses wrong. Like, are you talking? Like, no, like you're wrong.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know how many muses there are, or whatever. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like the idea that I would be writing about a thing and I specifically got it wrong. Like that's the sort of thing that offends me. Like where you're wrong. You know, like you have your fact wrong. Like, but I don't mind if people like if I've read reviews where people are like, you know, Ball does this and he's wrong, and I'm like, yeah, I did do that. I could be wrong. Like, it's a fair point. I don't quite agree with it, but it's I've done that. I feel like that feeling. Maybe I'm wrong with this, but I feel like that feeling of like this is precious and a part of me. I think that is often a function of not having written enough stuff.
Sure.
Because I think if you've only written like 10 stories that you think are really good, or you've only got like 20 poems you really are happy with, I think it's natural to feel like that they represent something beyond themselves. Like they represent your writing in a symbolic fashion. And so when people attack them, I think that it's easy to, or criticize them on any level, I think it's easy to feel like, well, the criticism somehow feels connected to your writing as a project or as like as a whole thing rather than like specifically this piece. And I think like if you just write a lot of stuff, like I think if you have like 1,000 poems or you've written like 100 stories, like at that point I feel like it just, you know, it's not that your work isn't important or special or you don't feel like, you know, it matters or whatever. But I think it's just, it doesn't necessarily, a single piece isn't symbolic in the same way. I think it's like, it's easier, I think, to, it's like, I think taking criticism helps, it's easier to do if you just have a lot of stuff. For like, sure. I really believe in quantity.
It gets better over time, but there's also, like I was saying, like there are, like with that story, like I knew that was how the story was going to be, but I didn't write it in a vacuum and not show it to anybody, and like it was shown to a lot of people, and real problems were pointed out to me all through the case, like all through the writing of it. And so everything that I have written has gone through like these multiple stages and multiple readers before I've gotten to that point where I feel like it stands on its own that way. So if you have your beta readers or people you trust to look at it first, and you've gone through that stuff and you sort of weathered a few people's criticisms, it does make it easier to take the criticism in a review.
How do you how do you decide though if a criticism is correct? Like that's something we were talking about last class, like doing feedback, giving feedback, and so on. Like, how do you decide whether or not the feedback is right?
That's tougher. I think that comes from practice and doing it more, because the first few times you're sort of a shit about it. You won't hear it. You won't hear anybody's criticism. And then that needs to stop. And that, like, I don't.
But they might be.
I don't
wrong.
know. There is always criticism that's wrong. And so it's the same thing with taking more general writing advice. Some of it's going to apply, most of it is not, and you have to sort of develop an ear for it. So, like in terms of criticism that is correct or incorrect or doesn't, like it sort of comes down to the piece and like does this person, does their advice, do they understand what I'm trying to do, and will their advice make that will it make that goal happen better, like, or good English, like will their advice actually make my attempt more successful at conveying this, and like do they understand what I'm trying to convey, I think is the biggest way of assessing whether or not advice is good. And in order to get at that, like you have to have a pretty good understanding of what it is you're trying to do, and sometimes that is unclear too and doesn't happen until 3 or 4 iterations of the same idea. You may realize that like you thought you were writing one story and you eventually come to the realization that no, it's something else, and it morphs, and then different advice will start to to latch on in different places.
Here's a really interesting question. How do you write a character who thinks very differently from yourself? Have you ever, because of Dawn at Parties, I think of as an example. Like, here's a guy who is, I presume you're not interested in cannibalism as a party game, you know? Like, even if you were interested in cannibalizing people, like, it's a very, this guy's still alive. Like, obviously, like, you're in a very different headspace in that character like that. So how do you write that character? Because I can't remember if that was a first-person point of view story, but I thought it was.
It's not, but it's very like third-person limited. It's very much like just over the shoulder of this one guy, and he's very strange. Where he rents out this basement apartment so he can train to eat.
There's all these great training moments. So
that. The idea for that story, if you're interested in gross, I was at Newburger, and I was waiting for my burger, and they had TSN on, and it was an eating contest. It was like the hot dog eating contest. And I was just like, that's the grossest damn thing to have on in a restaurant. That's disgusting.
And they dip the hot dog.
In water and then ram it down their throat. And then while they started talking to them about how they prepare to do this. And they drink gallons of water and throw it up so that their stomach stretches so that they can hold, because they can't puke. Like if you puke within a certain amount of time, you lose the contest. So like for days they're stretching, and they all sort of look weird and distended. And so like waiting for a hamburger, all this, I was like, well, that's really gross. And then I just started, well, that would be even grosser. What if it was cannibals? And there was like an underground cannibal eating contest, and they went to this kind of rigor to get it done. And then the other details sort of crystallized as it went through. So that's where that idea came from. In terms of thinking like it, so that character is probably the closest I've gotten to like a serial killer. And my dad, he's retired now, but he used to do DNA profiling for the RCMP. So he was obsessed with serial killers when I was a kid. So I knew all about them and could pick them out of the lineup and everything. So like I'm weirdly versed in the psychology of serial killers because of that. So that is maybe why I can get into that headspace pretty well.
So it's just research? Like that's how you get in the head of these characters? Like here's how a guy who's training for an eating contest, what he would be thinking about. And here's how like a serial killer would, like, is it just sort of doing research? I
guess, yeah, because that is like I delved a little deeper and found out like what are different ways that they do train for eating contests. I looked up like what are the records for certain to see what is like an actual realistic amount of matter that someone can put in their stomach, and like it's disgusting. It's really gross. So I guess, yeah, like if you run down, if like you just go down the rabbit hole of the idea, and then the characters can sort of start to populate that way. And like I suppose that one was like I had an end goal in mind that I needed someone who would be in this contest. So it was the psychology was developed around getting them into that situation.
What about in a story like Stuck? So like I think of the father. So here's a guy who you're not really in his head, but again, you've got to kind of, have him do things that are motivated and so on. So again, like, what are you doing to try to figure out like how a guy who would want this photo? Because again, like you're seeing the photo as creepy and disturbing. You're looking at these photos and thinking like, how creepy is this? But he's thinking like, oh, this will be a nice thing that the child will like. My son would like to have in his room. So it's easy to see like where you would maybe get in the headspace of the guy the kid who's creeped out to have the photo. But how do you get in the headspace of like the guy who thinks this is a nice gift for his son?
Sure.
Like how do you get into that? Is there some sort of research you're doing into like why people are doing these photos, or what's the?
That's maybe a little bit of like personal experience. I don't know if anyone has like, you ever had a family member, like a distant family member you were afraid of, and you were trotted in front of them, like a great grandparent or someone with an illness or something, and you were a little kid and it's like, go hug this guy, and you're just like, good God, no, like I yes, like I have had that. My on my like a distant cousin, like there was a cousin of one of my family members, or like the grandmother was grandmother's cousin or something. Very creepy old lady. Like very nice, but like she scared the hell out of me. And her husband, who was in his 50s, lived in her house and slept in her bedroom. And when I was 6, I thought that was fucked up. But like they were family members. My family knew them and like wanted to introduce their children, and so it was just this very go give Aunt Toonie a hug. And I was terrified of her. I didn't want to go near her. But so it was getting in the mindset of like, well, my parents know there's nothing wrong. Sure. And I have since talked to them about, like, did you realize how creepy this side of our family is? Like, it's really odd. So I guess like that is where the headspace that I got into for there. And for the father specifically. So something with that story that is sort of related to the idea of the pictures of the mothers, like under these curtains, fulfilling this very important role. They have to be there, but they don't want them seen. They don't want them shown. So for this boy who's growing up, and he's being told over and over that his mother is this wonderful, edifying presence in his life, and he doesn't know her. Like he doesn't really have these memories of her. All he has this memory of is sitting next to this dead body, being told, "This is your mother. She loves you," and that would ruin your brain. But the dad has this idea of who the mother should be to the boy, and he's trying to make that connection with the photograph. He thinks that it's this great loving gesture because it will be this way to crystallize the boy's relationship to the mother, and the father just doesn't realize that the only relationship that's there is terrifying.
So then in some ways, having him being in a boarding school is like a plot device that is sort of creating this distance between, like in that case, there's a physical distance between like how the boy and his mother, but then the father and the mother in proximity, and so it sort of starts to give you the like a plot device that helps kind of explain or differentiate the character's psychologies, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit, and like some of that came from just working within the mode. So there's a lot of ways that this story follows a lot of tropes of ghost stories at that time. So like the turn of the screw, or anything else, like basically with a governess. I'm just shy of Henry having a governess there. That there's the maid that he remembers that they can't afford to keep anymore, and that he's sent off to boarding school. And there are a lot of stories that they with that setup, and part of the sinister part seems to be that there is a lack of intimacy between the children and the parents, and the parents operate on this idea that, well, of course my kids would not be afraid of me, they have no reason to. And whereas the kids' perspective is, I don't even know them, like they ship me away, I don't have that relationship. So that was where a lot of like the tension in terms of the scare comes from, because there's also for Henry, like he doesn't necessarily know that his father's motivations are harmless. Like he's sort of just as afraid of the dad as he is of the mom.
So what's the best way to channel those sorts of character traits into how these characters talk? Like when you're writing dialogue, or you're, otherwise sort of writing around the character, like on a style perspective, or in the terms of actual language that you're using. Like what are the best ways, do you think, to actually get at kind of showing those character traits? Like in dialogue, for example.
Sure.
Like what do you think of when you're revising or writing, that kind of thing?
Well, I guess for this one as an example as well, I suppose the best way to figure that out would be the difference between the way Henry speaks to Jenny and the way Henry speaks to his father. Is her name Jenny? I
think it's Jenny.
Do I have it even right?
I mix up the yellow wallpaper because you got these allusions to the yellow wallpaper, which I think Jenny is one of them too, actually.
Yeah, but so Jenny is the sister.
So I mixed it up, but I think that's right.
So the way Henry speaks to the maid, the governess that he actually has a relationship with, is much more easy and open, and with the dad, it's sort of like it's a little more stilted, or just sitting there quietly. Like he actually doesn't, like he speaks very little. There's actually not a lot of dialogue in the story, so maybe it's a terrible example to try to draw those kind of comparisons. But That would be like, it sort of depends on the character trait, but in terms of defining relationships between different characters or that dynamic, showing a difference between when they talk to this person versus when they talk to this other person can do a lot to establish that there.
So that's the first part of my interview with Keith Cadieux. The second part is available in the next episode. You can get show notes for this episode at jonathanball.com/2. Thank you to Keith. Thank you to you for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe to this podcast. And also, it would be very helpful if you would leave a review or give it a rating. Those things help a lot in terms of making this podcast discoverable for other people. If you ever want more information about this particular podcast, just go to writingthewrongway.com. jonathanball.com also has all the same information. Thank you again for listening, and have a great week. Keep writing the wrong way.